Every single one of these films almost never happened. We are talking about movies that were stuck in development for decades, scripts that no studio wanted to touch, and budgets so massive that executives refused to sign off until one specific person said yes. One actor, that is all it took. One name on a contract, and suddenly a film that had been sitting on a shelf collecting dust for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years was greenlit overnight. And here's the thing, some of these actors fought for years to drag their projects into existence. Without these people, some of the greatest science fiction films ever made would not exist. Not in a different form, not with a different cast. They simply would not exist at all. And the deeper you go into this list, the more insane the stories get. Number 15. Southland Tales, 2006. Before Dwayne Johnson became the highest-grossing actor in Hollywood history, he made what might be the strangest creative decision of his entire career. In 2005, Johnson signed on to a bizarre, sprawling dystopian satire from the director of Donnie Darko. That director was Richard Kelly, and the film was Southland Tales. But here is the part most people do not know. Kelly had been developing Southland Tales since March 2004, but filming was supposed to begin in July 2004, and after a full year, the cameras still had not rolled. The project was stuck. Then Dwayne Johnson joined the cast in April 2005, and everything changed. Kelly himself said it plainly. God bless Dwayne Johnson for helping to make that happen. He called Johnson the centerpiece of the story, and confirmed that once those three actors were locked in, the film was finally greenlit. Without Johnson, Southland Tales stays in development limbo forever. The budget was set at $17.5 million. Behind the scenes, Kelly knew the film was incomplete when it screened in competition at the 2006 Cannes Film Festival. The visual effects were unfinished. He wanted to warn audiences it was a work in progress, but the people around him told him not to say that. The result was one of the most hostile receptions in Cannes history. In fact, Universal pulled out of domestic distribution. Sony eventually picked up the US rights for under $5 million and invested another $1 million to finish the visual effects. Then, the WGA strike hit. Johnson was set to host Saturday Night Live the same weekend Southland Tales opened. Geller was booked on Letterman. Scott was booked on Kimmel. Every single promotional appearance was canceled. The film limped into fewer than 63 theaters and earned just $275,000 domestically. Worldwide, it made $374,743. Richard Kelly's directing career practically ended because of this film. He has only made one film since then. Number 14. Passengers, 2016. In 2007, John Spates wrote a spec script about a man who wakes up alone on a deep space colonization ship. The script was called Passengers. Studios loved the concept, but then nobody could get it made. Keanu Reeves was the first actor to attach himself to the project. He tried to get it greenlit for years through his production company, Company Films. At various points, Emily Blunt, Reese Witherspoon, and Rachel McAdams were all connected to the female lead. Director Brian Kirk was set to make his feature debut with it. Nothing worked. The script bounced between studios for nearly a decade, admired by everyone, funded by no one. Then Jennifer Lawrence said yes. In late 2014, Sony Pictures won the rights to the film. Lawrence and Chris Pratt were cast in February 2015, but even then it almost did not happen. The studio's strategy was transparent and deliberate. Sell the chemistry, sell the star power. Do not, under any circumstances, reveal the film's central moral crisis in the marketing. Because at the heart of Passengers is a genuinely uncomfortable question. Pratt's character, stranded awake and facing a lifetime of solitude, makes a decision so ethically troubling that it reframes everything that follows.
Dance off.
He wakes Lawrence deliberately, condemning her to the same fate, and then falls in love with her without telling her what he did. That premise, handled bravely, could have been one of the most provocative mainstream science fiction films in years. Instead, the studio flinched. The marketing sold a romantic space adventure. Audiences expecting a love story found a moral thriller with a conventional ending, and critics who recognized the squandered potential were unforgiving. Passengers opened and grossed $303 million worldwide. technically profitable, but considered a significant underperformance given the investment. Number 13. Lucy, 2014. Luc Besson had the idea for Lucy 10 years before he ever wrote the script. 9 years before the cameras rolled, the French filmmaker became obsessed with the debunked theory that humans only use 10% of their brain capacity. He knew the science was wrong. He admitted it openly. But he also knew it was the perfect launchpad for a science fiction film. But the problem was that the concept required a very specific kind of actor. Someone who could be believably vulnerable in the first act and then terrifyingly powerful by the third. For years, Angelina Jolie was in serious talks with Besson to star in his next directorial effort. Reports widely circulated that Jolie was originally cast and then dropped out. Besson later denied she was ever officially attached to Lucy specifically, but the connection lingered in the press for years. Then Scarlett Johansson walked in. Besson said the moment they met, she was immediately precise and professional. The budget was $40 million. Filming took place in Taipei, Paris, and New York City. When Lucy opened on July 25, 2014, it did not just succeed, it dominated. The film debuted at number 1 with $44 million domestically. By the end of its run, Lucy had grossed $469 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing French-produced film in U.S. history at the time. Number 12. The Fifth Element, 1997. Luc Besson started writing the story that became The Fifth Element when he was 16 years old. He was 38 when it finally opened in cinemas. That is over 2 decades of obsession for a single film. And the reason it almost never happened comes down to one very expensive problem. The budget had ballooned to $90 million, plus Besson needed a major Hollywood star to anchor the whole thing. By the time he was ready to make it, he had one name in mind for the lead: Bruce Willis. Not because Willis was the obvious choice for a flamboyant, orange-haired future cab driver, but because Willis in 1997 carried a specific kind of mainstream trust. Post-Die Hard, post-Pulp Fiction, audiences followed him into unfamiliar territory without needing to be convinced. That trust was worth more than any marketing budget. Behind the scenes, Jean-Paul Gaultier designed nearly 1,000 individual costumes for the film, including the now iconic bandage outfit worn by Mila Jovovich as Lilu. Gaultier worked on the designs for over a year, and his contribution elevated the film from science fiction spectacle into something that crossed into legitimate fashion history. Jovovich herself was 20 years old during production. Her physical performance as Lilu required learning a constructed fictional language Besson had developed across decades of notes, and she committed to it with an intensity that gave the character an authenticity no amount of visual effects could manufacture. The Fifth Element opened and grossed $263 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing French film at the international box office. Number 11. I Am Legend, 2007. Richard Matheson published his novel I Am Legend in 1954. It had already been adapted twice, first as The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price in 1964, and then as The Omega Man with Charlton Heston in 1971. But Warner Brothers wanted the definitive version, and for over a decade they could not get it made. In the mid-1990s, screenwriter Mark Protasevich wrote a draft that became the toast of Hollywood. The budget was projected at $108 million. Then Warner Brothers got cold feet. In 1997 and 1998, the studio had released The Postman and Sphere, both expensive sci-fi flops. But here's something interesting. All this while, the project did not die. It just kept failing. Rob Bowman was briefly attached. Then, in 2002, Michael Bay was in talks to direct with Will Smith set to star and Schwarzenegger producing. That version also collapsed. But through every failed iteration, one name stayed locked in: Will Smith. He had been connected to the project since the early 2000s, and when screenwriter Akiva Goldsman and director Francis Lawrence revived the concept in 2004, it was Smith who was still there. He even personally approached Guillermo del Toro to direct, but del Toro passed. Lawrence came aboard instead. The production budget hit $150 million. Of that, $40 million alone went toward transforming New York City into a post-apocalyptic wasteland through a combination of digital mapping and practical set construction. A single scene on the Brooklyn Bridge cost at least $5 million over 6 nights of filming, requiring over 2,000 crew and extras, military vehicles, helicopters, and massive lighting rigs. 1 week into production, Lawrence switched from practical creature effects to CGI, a decision that inflated the budget and extended post-production significantly. In fact, the team was still receiving finished visual effects shots just 1 month before release. I Am Legend opened on December 14, 2007, and became the largest non-Christmas December opening in US box office history at the time. It earned $585 million worldwide and became the 7th highest grossing film of the year. Smith carried virtually the entire film alone, with no dialogue for large stretches and no supporting cast for most of the runtime. Number 10. Gravity, 2013. Alfonso Cuarón spent 4.5 years making Gravity. Not 4.5 years of continuous filming, but 4.5 years of solving problems no filmmaker had ever faced before. Problems of light, of movement, of how a human body behaves in zero gravity when the camera needs to follow it without cutting for minutes at a time. The technology to make the film he envisioned did not exist when he started. His team had to invent it. And when the money ran thin and the technical challenges mounted, the entire project nearly collapsed. What kept it alive was one phone call. Sandra Bullock said she was in. Behind the scenes, the production took over 4 years to complete. On set, Cuarón and his team had to develop entirely new technology to simulate weightlessness and continuous camera movement in space. Bullock spent long hours inside a custom-built rig that the crew made welcoming by celebrating every time she arrived on set and installing a lit sign to invite her in. Gravity opened to $55 million, setting the record for the biggest October opening ever. It went on to gross $723 million worldwide. Bullock did not just star in Gravity. She rescued it from the dead, carried it on her shoulders for 91 minutes, and turned it into one of the most profitable films of the decade. Number 9. Interstellar, 2014. The idea for Interstellar did not begin with Christopher Nolan. It began in 2006, when producer Linda Obst recruited Kip Thorne to develop a film grounded in real science about wormholes and time travel. Steven Spielberg was the first director attached. He hired Jonathan Nolan to write the screenplay, and the two worked together on the project for about 3 years. Then Spielberg left. The project sat at Paramount without a director until Christopher Nolan saw an extraordinary opportunity and jumped in. He rewrote the screenplay with Jonathan, restructuring key story elements and adding the gravitational anomalies. The production budget reached $165 million. Behind the scenes, Nolan planted 500 acres of corn outside Calgary, Canada, because the script called for Cooper's farm to be surrounded by both cornfields and mountains, and Nolan refused to use CGI for the landscape. He later sold the corn at a profit. Filming locations stretched from Alberta to Iceland, where the alien planet sequences were shot against real glaciers and black sand beaches.
Here we go.
Interstellar opened on November 5, 2014, and grossed $774 million worldwide. The film became one of the highest-grossing IMAX releases of all time. Number 8. The Martian, 2015. Andy Weir originally self-published The Martian on his personal website, 1 chapter at a time, for free. When readers asked for a Kindle version, he listed it on Amazon for 99 cents because that was the lowest price the platform would allow. Within months, it became the #1 most downloaded science fiction title on the platform. By March 2013, 20th Century Fox had optioned the novel. Screenwriter Drew Goddard adapted the book into a screenplay and was attached to direct. And then, nothing happened. The film did not move forward.
Grab a hold of him.
Producer Simon Kinberg then brought the book to the attention of Ridley Scott, and here is where the math changed. In May 2014, Scott entered negotiations to direct, and Matt Damon was cast as stranded astronaut Mark Watney. It was only after both of those names were locked in that Fox approved production. During production, the challenge was enormous. Mark Watney spends a huge portion of the film alone on screen. No supporting cast, no dialogue partner. Just one man talking to cameras and cracking jokes while trying not to die on Mars. That kind of film requires an actor with the charm, humor, and emotional range to hold an audience for 2.5 hours without the luxury of scene partners for long stretches. Behind the scenes, 20 sets were built on one of the largest sound stages in the world in Budapest, Hungary. The Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan doubled for the Martian surface, chosen because photographs of the landscape were nearly indistinguishable from actual images taken by NASA's Curiosity rover. When The Martian premiered, it grossed over $630 million worldwide. NASA itself praised the film's accuracy. But none of it happens without Damon. He was the actor who made Fox believe that a movie about a man growing potatoes on Mars could become one of the most profitable films of the year. Number 7. Planet of the Apes, 1968. Pierre Boulle's 1963 French novel had been considered unfilmable by nearly every studio executive who read it, and the reasons were straightforward. The cost of convincingly realizing a civilization of talking, reasoning apes on screen was considered prohibitive. The makeup technology required did not fully exist yet, so producer Arthur P. Jacobs approached Charlton Heston for a solution. When Heston read the script, he pushed hard for 20th Century Fox to take the financial risk. He also recommended director Franklin J. Schaffner to be part. Schaffner came aboard and immediately made a critical creative decision. Instead of building the expensive futuristic ape society from Serling's script, he redesigned the ape world as a primitive civilization. That single change slashed the budget dramatically and made the film financially viable. Behind the scenes, Heston performed a scene opposite 2 actors in prototype ape prosthetics. The test worked. The apes looked convincing. Fox greenlit the film with a budget of $5.8 million. When Planet of the Apes opened, it earned $33 million at the box office. It spawned 4 sequels, a television series, an animated show, a 2001 remake, and a modern reboot trilogy that has earned over $2.3 billion combined. Number 6. Total Recall, 1990. Total Recall had been stuck in development hell for nearly a decade before Arnold Schwarzenegger rescued it. The film was based on Philip K. Dick's 1966 short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, and the rights had passed through multiple production companies. At one point, the project was picked up by Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis, who pushed it into the early stages of production in 1987. But here's the thing. De Laurentiis never wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger for the lead role. He envisioned a smaller, more cerebral actor. Then, De Laurentiis' studio went bankrupt. And that is when Arnold Schwarzenegger made his move. Behind the scenes, Schwarzenegger convinced Coralco Pictures to buy the rights for a comparatively cheap $3 million. He then negotiated a salary of $10 to $11 million, plus 15% of the film's profits, along with an unusually broad degree of control over the production. Ironically, Schwarzenegger had previously been considered too bulky to fit into the RoboCop suit, but Total Recall would give them their first collaboration. With Schwarzenegger attached and driving the production, Coralco greenlit a budget estimated at around $65 million, making it one of the most expensive films made at that time. The shoot was grueling. During production, Schwarzenegger sustained multiple injuries, including a broken finger and a crushed hand from stunts gone wrong. Total Recall premiered and earned $261 million worldwide. Number 5. Aliens, 1986. In 1983, a relatively inexperienced filmmaker named James Cameron was hired to write a story for the Alien sequel. Cameron wrote a treatment that reimagined the franchise as an action war film rather than a slow-burn horror picture. He called it Aliens, and for years the project stalled. sitting dormant until a new Fox executive named Lawrence Gordon pushed to finally get the sequel into production. But here's the thing, there was one massive problem. Sigourney Weaver was not sure she wanted to come back. She had doubts about the project. She was not desperate for a sequel. But after meeting Cameron and reading what he had written, she became interested in revisiting Ripley. Then the deal fell apart. Fox refused to sign a contract with Weaver over a payment dispute and asked Cameron to write Ripley out of the script entirely. Cameron refused. The standoff escalated. Cameron reportedly played one final card. He contacted Arnold Schwarzenegger's agent and floated the idea of Schwarzenegger starring instead. When Weaver's agent got wind of this, the deal closed almost immediately. Weaver signed on for $1 million. Aliens opened and earned over $131 million worldwide. Number 4. Edge of Tomorrow, 2014. In 2004, Japanese author Hiroshi Sakurazaka published a light novel called All You Need Is Kill, about a soldier trapped in a time loop during an alien invasion. It was a cult hit in Japan, but virtually unknown in the West. In 2010, Warner Brothers bought a scripted adaptation for $3 million. On paper, the concept was brilliant, but it was also an incredibly expensive gamble. No existing franchise, no built-in audience, just a dense, high-concept science fiction premise based on a book that most American moviegoers had never heard of. And here's the thing. Warner Brothers did not just greenlit this film based on obscure Japanese light novels. They greenlight it based on one thing instead: a star who guarantees global attention. And that star was Tom Cruise. Cruise did not just lend his name to the project, he physically transformed himself for it. The production built nearly 100 practical exoskeleton battlesuits, each assembled from 275 custom components and 150 pieces of hardware. The suits weighed between 85 and 130 pounds, depending on the weaponry attached. Each actor needed 4 people to help put one on. Initially, it took Cruise 30 minutes to get into the suit and another 30 to remove it. By the end of production, the time had been reduced to 30 seconds. Between takes, actors were suspended by chains from iron frames just to relieve the pressure on their shoulders. Cruise performed all his own stunts inside the suit and was killed on screen approximately 200 times throughout the film. When Edge of Tomorrow opened, it grossed $381 million worldwide. Today, it is widely considered a modern classic. Number 3. The Terminator, 1984. James Cameron was 29 years old and was surviving on almost nothing when he had a fever dream about a chrome skeleton dragging itself from a fire. He wrote it into a script, then he faced the problem every unknown filmmaker faces. Nobody would make it with him attached as director. The project had heat as a concept, but Cameron had no track record, no leverage, and no way to force the issue. So his only solution was to sell the rights to the script to Orion Pictures for $1, on the condition that he got to direct it. But here's the thing, Orion executive Mike Medavoy wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger as Kyle Reese. Cameron, on the other hand, had envisioned Reese as a lean, vulnerable man, not a former Mr. Universe. Cameron later admitted he went to the lunch meeting planning to pick a fight with Schwarzenegger, but something unexpected happened. The two got along, and over the course of that meal, Schwarzenegger began describing in vivid detail how the Terminator would think, move, and kill. He was obsessed with the villain. Cameron realized at that moment that Schwarzenegger was not describing Kyle Reese. He was describing the performance the Terminator required. When the Terminator opened, it earned $78 million worldwide. It launched Cameron's career, turned Schwarzenegger into a global superstar, and created one of the most valuable franchises in science fiction history. Number 2. Contact, 1997. Carl Sagan conceived the idea for Contact in 1979. Together with his wife Ann Druyan, they wrote a film treatment more than 100 pages long and set it up at Warner Brothers Studio. Then development stalled. The project sat dormant for years. Finally, in 1989, the film adaptation was finally rejuvenated. But what followed was one of the most chaotic development cycles in modern Hollywood. Behind the scenes, George Miller came aboard and began pre-production. He cast Jodie Foster in the lead role of Dr. Ellie Arroway and approached Ralph Fiennes for the role of Palmer Joss. Then, Warner Brothers fired Miller in 1995. Years of work discarded, projects collapse. But Contact did not collapse because Jodie Foster never left. She had signed on under Miller's tenure, and she stayed attached through every setback, every regime change, and every creative upheaval. Foster brought that credibility and something more specific. Her career had been defined by performances that made intelligence itself compelling to watch. In fact, on set, she consulted extensively with astronomers and scientists to understand not just the technical dimensions of the role, but the psychological reality of what it means to dedicate an entire life to a search that most people consider futile. But here's where it gets touching. Contact's originator, Carl Sagan, died before the film was completed. He never saw the finished version of the story he had been developing for nearly 2 decades. Contact was released and grossed $171 million worldwide. Foster's performance as a driven, emotionally complex scientist became one of the defining roles of her career. Number 1. Alien, 1979. Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett wrote a screenplay about a crew of space truckers who encounter a deadly extraterrestrial organism aboard their commercial freighter. The script was originally titled Star Beast before being renamed Alien. Every character in the original draft was male. Even the role of Ripley was written as a man. When producers Walter Hill and David Giler came aboard to rewrite the script, they made a decision that would alter the course of science fiction history. They changed Ripley to a woman, but did not change anything else about how the character was written. Behind the scenes, Swiss artist H.R. Geiger designed the alien creature and the derelict spacecraft. The chestburster scene was staged without telling the cast exactly what would happen, and the horror on their faces was real. Weaver later said the cast genuinely could not believe what they had seen. She was the only entirely unknown actor in the ensemble, and in a decade of horror films built on downer endings, audiences spent the entire final act convinced she would not survive. Her survival was shocking. It was also the birth of one of the most important characters in cinema. Alien was released on May 25, 1979, and earned over $100 million worldwide on a budget of roughly $11 million. It spawned a franchise that now includes multiple sequels, prequels, crossovers, television series, novels, comics, and video games spanning nearly 5 decades. If you journeyed through this video to the end, drop a comment telling us which film on this list surprised you the most. And if you have not already, subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss another deep dive like this one.